Hi, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 5 demo for the piece I call Stretch. So what you're looking at right now is a piece from my third art book called Pink Hair Girls. Some of you may actually even be on this channel because this is where you first saw me, because I ran a Kickstarter for it, and that kind of brought a lot of people into being aware of my work. And so this piece is called Stretch. It was, I was just, like I very plainly sort of call all these videos, that's the same way that I named all of the pieces for that book. And when I started the piece that you're about to watch now, I wasn't necessarily trying to address this one, but it sort of ended up becoming something where I was like, okay, let's revisit that pose in a different way. By in a different way, hopefully I mean in a better way. And I just checked the date, by the way, that's 2013. I can't believe that's 7 years old now. So here we are. That was obviously, you see the final piece for a second there. Now you can start seeing where I was doing the sketching. And somebody asked me the other day where I come up with the poses for these types of drawings, and really it's just playing around. If there's something where I need to reference a pose, I will look it up. But for this, you could see how, like, when I was first drawing her, it was going off screen, and then I shrunk her and scooted her over, and then I just started drawing in her face once I got her hands done, and that's really it. It's me just sort of playing with the anatomy, and if there's something where I don't feel like I can handle the anatomy because it's either a unique angle or something like that, then I'll look up reference on how to do it. So here you see we did a super fast rough, and the pose, I thought, okay, we can do something with the pose. Right about now is where I'm remembering, oh, didn't I do something like this for the Pink Hair Girls book? And then I'm thinking, okay, well, let's do it anyways and try to do something completely different with it. So it's weird, but it's kind of a fun exercise. The Pink Hair Girl book in general was a fun exercise because I had this theme where it was like the pink hair and it was always going to be flat, and there was just a lot of consistencies, like white background, etc., and it was kind of fun to explore that one theme. And you could say that this is in the same spirit as that, which is the theme is basically just a chick in this pose. Can I do it better? Can I do it differently? Not that I'm going to do like a whole art book of just people like cracking their knuckles or stretching their arms or whatever, but it ended up kind of being spiritually very similar. In fact, you can even see that her distant arm here is treated similarly to the one from Pink Hair Girls, where it's just like this shape, there's not a lot to it, and it's kind of in the background, and we're treating it kind of minimally. So now we've done the super rough sketch and then the rough sketch, and now I'm doing something tighter. This is not something that's tight enough that I would necessarily consider it like a final line if the image was going to have lines. If I went with something like this, a line like this, then the final image would probably be deliberately rough, but it's more to give myself a really clear guide for when I go in to do the paint part. And so we're getting those lines done. By the way, in the course of me doing these lines, we're going to see the charm bracelet that I put around her wrist. I asked everybody on Instagram if they knew what those two charms were that's on the bracelet. So if you think you know what they are once they get sketched in or once we start painting them, see if you can leave a comment before the end of the video where I reveal what they are, and you'll see if you were right. Or you could just cheat and not leave a comment or whatever. But maybe it's fun. So let's start talking about the layer structure. I might get a little bit wrong, but I think I'm going to get it 90% right. So the skin layer, that is her neck, arm, body, and main part of her hand that's connected to that arm, is all on one layer. And then her distant arm is on a layer that's all the way in the back. And then her head, her like face, is on a layer that's above the layer that you see being painted right now. And then on top of all of that is the shirt layer. The shirt layer is on top. And then the fingers, all of that is actually a mix of different layers that are sort of stacked differently, so I could keep it all separate for the painting. That was really important to keep separate. So you'll see as they get layered in here, no pun intended, you'll get to see exactly like what is what as far as the layer structure is concerned. But then all the layers that are on top of all the layers that are the components of her face are in fact on top of her face layer. So we're going to get a few layers for her eyes, a layer for her lips, a few layers for like the jewelry. In fact, the jewelry, the charm bracelet and its elements and her piercings and all that stuff on her ears, those are all on the topmost layers, I believe. I think they're even above the shirt layer. And then her hair, you'll see eventually we cut out the hairline from the face right there. It's happening, and that's because the hair layer is between the face layer and the neck layer, because that way I can cut it out and I can get the clean cut of where her hairline is, and so that hair will go behind that and get that clean cut, and then the part that goes down onto her neck will be above her neck, so I can have that on there. And it's just a nice way for me to separate it both logically and give myself cleanliness when I'm actually painting it. Something that I want to talk about that's not really about the piece, because we're going to be doing a lot of repetition of things that we've done in the past, but I want to kind of cover, was something that I posted on Instagram today, and I got a lot of responses that was actually asking me to talk about it more, so I wanted to talk about it here. The topic is people's perception of your work and what they sort of like take from it when they look at it. By take from it, I mean kind of like when they think about your work, what do they think are the most important aspects or the parts that stand out? The reason I brought this up is because I just find it funny and just really truly interesting about how people perceive your work. I think the most pronounced example of this is if you see somebody who either is trying to flat out mimic your style, or somebody who's trying to do something kind of alongside it and say that it's inspired by it. And the thing that's really interesting about it is inspiration comes in like millions of forms, right? Like anyone can get inspired in lots of different ways, but when it's such a one-to-one transfer, it's unique and interesting to see what they chose. Like from someone's perspective, they can look at your work and they can say, oh, I love whatever it is. And you as the artist, like you were going for something different, or your favorite part of your art was some other thing that you developed, and you actually wish you could do something better that somebody else really likes that's a part of your artwork. Because, you know, style is kind of like a weird mix of like habits and accidents and things that you actually can't draw correctly, so you either develop a shorthand for it, or maybe something that you do make a conscious decision around, like I want to represent something a certain way. So it's sort of like this mix of all of these things, everything from the very deliberate, you are knowledgeable and you are doing something for a reason, all the way to the actually you didn't quite draw that right and you kind of never do, but it becomes something that other people love. This is something I've talked about on the channel before regarding learning how to draw actual forms versus learning how to draw symbols. And I think that symbols are awesome, and I think that we use them all across art for good and bad ways. One of the most commonly cited things is that people who learn to draw anime eyes, but they don't learn how to draw an eye. Which, honestly, I think that's kind of like a bullshit argument anyways, because there are tons of people who learn how to draw eyes because of, like, I don't know, like some sort of American cartoon, and nobody ever calls them out. But the point is that we use symbols as a shorthand to draw something that everybody now understands that symbol, so you just have to replicate it and you can get across your point without having to actually represent true form. And getting back to style, symbols are a really big part of style. There are things that we as artists develop that just make things go quicker, or it's something that someone drew once and it looked really good and people liked it, and then they're like, I guess I'll keep doing it that way. Not obviously solely because people like it, but because, you know, I mean, to be honest, a lot of people try to put a lot of I don't know, pressure on don't draw something just because people like it. But to be honest, like, we all kind of started drawing because someone liked it. Like, we all drew a picture when we were little and someone expressed, oh, hey, that's kind of neat, and then we went like, oh yeah, that's kind of neat, and we started like developing that response pattern. And I think that that's not a bad thing. I think it's totally fine, especially if you end up loving actually producing the art and you like showing it to people and you like getting a positive response. I think the negative is just more when that becomes the entire consuming thing of why you do it, I guess. But like, if you get a job in some sort of a studio, like an animation studio or a video game studio, you're ultimately doing art so someone else will like it. You're doing it for the consumer, you're doing it for your boss, your art director, an executive of some sort. And so the whole idea of drawing because you are getting a positive response from people, I think is totally great and okay. Wow, we're off track on topic. The topic was how people interpret your art. So for instance, if you are someone who you're working really hard on these like big volumetric shapes and you're trying to play with the fact of maybe you're using big, round, cool shapes, maybe even something that's not normally round, you're trying to really make more round and sell some sort of a unique style that you've been honing around these sort of big bubbly balloon shapes. And then somebody says, I love the way you paint shadows. It's so interesting to me. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm constantly trying to get those shadows right. And this person is telling me that they love those shadows. Like, that's, I mean, maybe you have such a strong reaction where you're like, that's wrong. Like, that person shouldn't like that part. They should like this part. And something that I mentioned on Instagram today was it's kind of like I like that band, and then you like that band, but I like that band for different reasons. Or it's okay, you like that band, but you're wrong for the reasons why you like that band. And I think that for an artist, that can be a very strange dynamic. Like, I'm sure there are super famous artists or very accomplished artists or whatever who, you know, we're all trying to achieve things when we're doing art. We're trying to either on an individual piece we have a specific goal, or it's just about like sort of generically getting better. And then but every one of these artists, even the big famous ones, they've got some sort of a goal, and even though they're accomplished and everybody respects them, on every piece they're thinking to themselves, I want to do this a little better, I want to do this a little differently, I want to whatever. And if somebody comes up to them and says, oh, I really love your work, and they're like, oh, thanks, like secretly that artist is kind of hoping that somebody's going to like their art for the same reasons that they do. Which is why it's also very painful when like an artist creates something brand new and they're really, really stoked about it, and then people look at it and then they're like, oh no, I mean, I don't really like this one. Especially in the days of Instagram where it's like you put 8 hours into something and then you post it on Instagram and people like, if you're lucky, they double tap and they keep scrolling. Actually, if you're lucky, they leave a comment, right? But if you're lucky, they double tap and they keep scrolling. If you're not lucky, they're just like, yeah, okay, and then they keep going. And the artist is actually thinking like, man, I did this really unique thing and I'm so proud of it, and I actually pulled it off, and I had this thing in my head and I actually got it done. And what they're hoping for secretly, although they kind of know it's never going to happen, is for the other person or somebody on Instagram or somebody wherever the hell it is to leave a comment and have like the exact insight that artist was hoping they would have. Hey, I see here you were doing XYZ and I think you did it exactly how you should have, or whatever it is. And that validation of just like, oh, thank you. Yes, you got exactly what I was going for. I think that is actually kind of rare. I think that appreciation is always like common. And I think that that's awesome. And I think the fact that people just show appreciation is a positive thing. But then there's that just extra layer where that artist is like, this time I rendered something different than I've ever rendered it before. It might have a similar effect, but to me, it was a really big leap. And even if just one person notices, it's like the happiest moment for that person. And so the reason why, just to double back, because I know I can get a little rambly on these videos, I want to kind of double back and make sure that I'm closing off this point, is I think it's really, really interesting when somebody says to you, oh, I love your work because I love the way you fill in the blank. And that fill in the blank is almost always different than what you think it's going to be. And I think that that's super interesting. One of my co-workers from another studio, in fact, I don't know if he's gonna watch this video, so I'm not gonna like call him out or anything like that, but he ended up messaging me on Instagram and saying that he finds this to be an interesting dynamic just in people, like just the idea of like your perception of yourself and someone else's perception of you, and just trying to reconcile those things. And can you actually portray yourself accurately to how you would like people to sort of reflect back who you are? And that is a super heady topic, and like there's so much for every individual on the planet to try and figure out if they are accomplishing that. But I think the thing that's kind of really interesting about art that's a little different than how you project yourself is that it's so concrete. It's not about small interactions, or did I say this at the right time, or what was my body language like, or did my actions follow my promises, and just kind of like all the complexity of that. It's literally just like I drew a thing, and then like 4 people can look at it and they can all say a different thing that they like about it, and then all 4 of those things will be different than what the artist likes about it. But then again, who cares what the artist likes, because at the end of the day, art is for the viewer. And an artist usually, even if they're really stoked with a piece, they usually grow to, I wouldn't say hate their art, but they grow to sort of like be indifferent towards it pretty quickly. Maybe that's just me and a few other artists I know, or a few other artists out there, I mean. But the way that I react to basically every piece I do that I like, I have this like slow decline where I slowly stop caring about it, and then eventually it sort of goes into the bucket of like, oh yeah, I did that piece in the past. I almost never hate something that I did in the past. I don't like grow to hate anything. If I dislike something that I did, I probably disliked it in the moment. But like, for instance, this piece that we're looking at right here, which I'll get to talking about a bit in a second, I really liked it when I was done with it. I was happy with it. I made it my wallpaper on my iPad and on my MacBook, and I thought it was just, I sort of like what I've talked about in the past, I did everything I wanted to do on it, so I was happy with it. But about a week later, it was like, okay, maybe I'll change my wallpaper now. And I think that that's just totally natural, because as an artist, you're kind of always chasing the next high. You're chasing the next, like, can I do a different thing? Can I be interested in something that I myself create? Well, if I show it to people, are they going to think that it's neat? Are they going to get happiness from it? Are they going to say something about it that then is going to, I'm going to internalize and think about on the next piece and all that kind of stuff? So I think that's just my bit about style and perception and what people think and how they process you and how you process you, and how that's never the same. And that's why at the end of the day, you really can't get hung up about it. But if you develop some sort of a curiosity about it, you can investigate and ask people and just kind of try to understand it a little bit more. But I really do think that it's like potentially mentally damaging to try and make sure you really thoroughly understand it, because it's just kind of ununderstandable. So if this is the first time you've ever watched a video on the channel, welcome to Self-Help for Artists with Mike Henry. But I usually talk a lot about the process, but the process that I'm following here is very similar to process that I've followed in the past. If you have questions about this piece, especially if you're a long-time watcher and you've seen this before, this sort of process before, and you want to ask questions that I'm not answering, please leave comments below. I respond to basically everyone, so if you ever leave a comment, I will be happy to clarify something or to elaborate on something or address it in a future video. By the way, this is episode 196, which means we're closing in on episode 200. I think I'm going to do just like a big Q&A for, not for episode 200, but to go along with episode 200. So if you've got those types of questions, like AMA type questions, I'll be putting up a video soon to sort of ask for those submissions. So start thinking about that, and maybe it'll just be fun, and you can think of something that's going to put me on the spot or something. I don't know, something like that. So where are we at in this piece right now? If you haven't watched this channel before, I encourage you to go back through some of the past videos to catch yourself up. If you have watched videos before on this channel, you know sort of where we're at. We've done the flats for the whole thing. We've done most of the ambient occlusion pass. That's what's going on right now. We're onto her shirt, which means that we're going to be doing her shirt. We're going to be doing the piercings. We're going to be doing the bracelet, the charm bracelet. And there's missing details right now in the charm bracelet. So when I go in to do the AO pass for that, I'll start adding in some of those details. So notice that the fingers are different colors. I made the back arm slightly darker than the front arm, and when I did that, I also just kept the fingers that color. She does not have two different colored arms, but I just thought when I was in the middle of it, like, screw it, it's keeping some separation, and as I add more things in, like redness in the fingers and more shadows and stuff like that, it'll all kind of blend together anyways, so I don't really change the color of that. There is some more skin variation that does need to happen. We've got some darkening around her eyelid. We have the blush on her nose and her ear. But we do need to also get a little bit of darkening on her elbow, a little bit of lightening on her torso, and so we'll get to that in a bit. Right now we're doing the AO on the jewelry, but it's not that important, meaning her piercings, but it's not really that detailed, so we're not going to zoom in for it. And now we go to the charms on her bracelet. So, do you know what they are yet? I'm sure some of you do. To be honest, the things that are on her bracelet are something that if you're familiar with it, you know instantly. I feel like there's a small pocket of people who absolutely love what this is referencing, and to you, I salute you. If you don't know what it is at the reveal, I will likely start gushing and highly encourage you to check it out. So we'll get to that soon. The one thing I want to be clear about, though, is the colors of these objects are different. What I did was I sort of did like an upscaled jewelry version of these two symbols. The thing on the right that looks like a ball is usually black with purple and a red eye, like you see right there, and the thing on the left is usually silver with glass with a red ball in the middle. So what we've done here is we've tried to class them up, make them kind of like ruby, glass, gold, that type of thing. Maybe ivory, or probably not ivory because we don't want to, like, you know, kill elephants, but something like that in the eye. I'm not a jeweler. I'm just, let's say an animal friendly white piece of something is stuck in there to make the sclera. I always get this wrong. Anyways, the white part of the eye. Here we did the skin variation on the elbow. We're doing the skin variation on her torso, the parts where the sun wouldn't normally hit, and then we just pull, it's just white, and then we pull back the opacity quite a bit. In fact, I think it's going to get pulled back even more eventually. And now we're moving on to the hard shadow, the direct shadow that we're having cast off of her. I mean, it's going to be any part of her body that's going to cast shadow onto another part of her body. We're going to try and capture that here. So you can see her head and neck and all that kind of stuff is casting onto her arm. You can see all the way down by her fingers, her parts of her hand are casting shadow onto like her other fingers and the bracelet and stuff. By her armpit, you can see that her arm is casting shadow basically onto her armpit and onto her upper boob, lower pectoral, I don't know. And then now we've got the cast shadow from her jawline onto her neck, her ear, and her nose, and all these things. I ended up eliminating the nose one, though, because I come in and I start putting some supplemental shadows in order to round out some extra shapes. And as you know from previous videos, I do that on the underside of the nose. I sometimes do that on the upper lip, things like that, just to emphasize some of that form. Speaking of things I normally do, I guess that, you know, I talked a ton about perception of style, and I didn't talk about my own style because I don't like doing that. It's like talking about flair. I just don't like talking about it. But I am curious to what you guys think of, like, my style. Not what you think of it, like, do you like it? Like, I'm not interested in that because I'm not going to change anytime soon. It's more about what do you think of when you see it. If somebody were to come up to you and you were to say, hey, there's this artist Mike Henry, and they said, hey, what's his art like? What would you say? I'm really curious because we're talking about this dissonance sometimes between the viewer and the artist, and I would just be curious. But, you know, like I always say, if you don't feel like leaving that comment, just don't. It's a free planet in some places. So exert that freedom to either leave or not leave a comment. Now I'm being silent because I don't know which part. Okay, we're onto the shirt now. There we go. That's nice and obvious. So we're finishing now that shadow. We have to line up that shadow from her arm to her armpit to the actual shirt part. Just make sure it all lines up. This is one of the negative sides about using the select paint, select clear. There is a little bit of sort of alacrity that you maybe will miss. You have to plan, you have to understand that some things are going to be separate, but it's like a give and take. We gain a little bit of control and we lose a couple of other things, basically. Even though the plug was yellow and that plug sort of referenced the gold from her bracelet, I decided that I didn't like how much attention that pulled. I mean, I know it's really small and so is the bracelet, but it ended up kind of creating this pull in two different directions. I like it dark and nondescript, so now you probably look directly at her and then you probably follow her arm line down to the detail that's in her hands, and then you look at the charms. And so that's more or less what I want to happen, instead of it being this sort of ping pong back and forth between those two yellow bits. So we're done more or less with the direct shadow stuff. I think we'll come back to it and we'll maybe do a little bit of tweaking later. We'll certainly put in some fill lights and some bounce lights in a second. But now what we're on to is essentially the highlight. It's a very toned down highlight. It's not like a shine like it is on her eye or what we'll put on the metal, but it is enough to try and turn a little bit more form. We've got some shadow that's doing that. We have the cast shadow that's helping us spatially sort of relate to where things are, and then we're putting a little bit of that highlight in so that we can see the peaks of some of those shapes. You just saw that big darkening around her eye, and then it lessened, and now we have the same thing on the underside of her nose, and that is all done with a new shadow layer that has been lowered in opacity quite a bit. Right now some super minor things are happening with the eyelashes, the mouth, just some like little bits that don't actually have that much highlight, so you can't really see what's happening there. And then we'll move on to the shirt, and that'll be the last or next to last part of this. I think the jewelry is in fact the last thing. Here we go onto the shirt now. This is all being done with a light pale blue that has a lowered opacity. I wanted this piece to be largely very matte feeling. I didn't want her to be too shiny. I didn't want it to have too high of contrast from the mid to high. So it's all pretty subtle, but it's enough that's there. I don't know if you'll really be able to see it, because if it happens it'll flicker super fast in here. Although you can see the clean flats, which is kind of nice. But anyways, but if I were to flick on and off that highlight layer, you would see that it actually has a bigger impact than you sort of think it's going to. You'll also notice that the background is white still. This one, I really didn't know what to do. I kind of wanted to leave her maybe against white, but I really like having that big block of color, and it really sets tone, and sort of across all these pieces, it sets this nice sort of like, oh, the yellow one, the pink one, the green one, whatever it is. And so I knew I wanted to change the color eventually. I just didn't know what to. And now here you can see me playing with a bunch of color, and yellow just felt really good. So that's where we go with it. I also had these splatters, these paint splatters. I wanted to kind of toy with this. I wanted to toy with some messiness, and so I grabbed some paint splatter brushes in Procreate, not new ones, just like the ones in Procreate, and I started playing with it. I was sampling the color from the character and then putting this splatter down. Eventually I kill it though, because I just don't think it makes sense. There is still a little bit of splatter happening in the fact that the outline that we put around her has a splatter effect to it, but the parts of it where it's like her splattering, they go away. Also, I reduce, oh man, geez, these sentences, they're so hard. I reduce the noise in the background, the painterly noise in the background eventually, and part of that's because something that I do for myself with a lot of these pieces is I create wallpapers with them. So the best way to do the wallpaper is to then take the background and just make it one flat color and then put the character on it. So like a lot of these more sort of like fashion-y, like solitary form pieces, I'll make like a wallpaper out of it. Maybe I'll throw it on my computer or my iPad or something. And I did that the same way at the end of this one. And then I was like, actually, I kind of like that more subdued, and so I ended up reducing that in the background. Here, by the way, we started putting the hair shines in. Those are more or less done. We've got details in the eyes happening just to emphasize the glossiness and the depth and things like that of the eyes. You just saw like a bunch of paint splatters go across because I was like, yeah, what about something like this? And then I hated it. Then I ended up taking the outline and making it a little bit brighter and a little bit more yellow. I put some like texture on the background. There's lots of stuff flicking on and off in the background, but then I end up right here. This is the final version of the image. You can see that the background has the noise reduced a lot. All the splatters are gone, but then there is this yellow outline that has a little bit of splatter to it, but she herself is no longer sort of breaking apart into a splattery thing. So that's good. Every time I talk about, towards the end of the video, how fast everything changes and how I'm trying a bunch of little things, and it's too hard to get captured in the time lapse. Soon I'm going to do one where I actually just talk through how I finish off a piece, and so I will look for that coming soon, but I'm not going to do that for this one right now. For now, we're going to move into what are those charms. So here's your last good look at the final rendered version of them, and here's what they actually are. On the left we have the Shizuma drive, and on the right we have the Eye of Vogler. These are key elements of the anime Giant Robo. If you don't know what Giant Robo is, it's the greatest anime of all time. It's already been declared that by the World Anime Council, so don't even try to argue with me, because it's already in the record books and sealed and confirmed, and there's no time to debate it. And I'm happy that it is the greatest anime in the world because I love it so much, so that makes me in love with the greatest anime of all time, which is just super dope. Also, something I thought was kind of funny is when I was Googling Eye of Vogler to throw into this video to show you guys, my own tattoo showed up as one of the top results. This here is a tattoo I have of the Eye of Vogler, and you can see the Shizuma drive down there at the bottom. So that was just kind of cool to see that show up. I also snuck a Shizuma drive into this illustration right here, which if you see it, it's very similar to what's in the current illustration. I put it right there, and I made it gold, and I made it kind of fancy, just like what we've got here. So kind of funny how that happened twice. I say that like it's coincidence and not like it's the exact same artist putting in two different pieces, but you know, whatever. It's starting to get late and I'm running out of things to say. So thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please consider hitting like or subscribe and all that stuff, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the many places where you can find me.